बहुत ही इम्पॉर्टेंट थीम एयर स्पेस मैनेजमेंट फॉर कॉम्प्लेक्स ड्रोन ऑपरेशंस, और हमारे जाने माने यहाँ पर स्पीकर्स पैनलिस्ट्स आए हुए हैं। आज हम उनके चर्चा सुनेंगे और उनके विचार जो वो प्रस्तुत करेंगे उससे ज़रूर टेक अवे होगा हम सबके साथ में। तो सभी गेस्ट स्पीकर का बहुत बहुत स्वागत है आज के इस पैनल डिस्कशन में। और आगे की कार्यवाही प्रोसीडिंग्स को आगे बढ़ाने के लिए आई वुड लाइक टू रिक्वेस्ट द रिस्पेक्टेड चेयर श्री के वासुदेवन जी टू काइंडली कमेंस द सेशन।
Good morning all, and thanks to the Ministry of Civil Aviation and the Drone Federation of India for inviting this team, and we'd like to have a small talk discussion on the airspace complexities for the drone operation and what we intend to do to get the drones into the airspace, which is complex, but at the same time ensure the safety. Basically, the air traffic management primarily catered to the manned aircraft in the past, and this recent introduction of the drones into the ecosystem has vastly changed the operation. After a gap of about 4 years of ban of the operation of drones in India from 14 to 18, we had an initial document which permitted the operation of drones under certain conditions as per the civil aviation requirements released in 2018. There were a lot of restrictions, and the industry wasn't able to grow comfortably. There was a lot of meetings. There were meetings with the DGCA, with the Airports Authority and the users, and the rules were simplified so that we are able to accommodate the drones in the airspace. And since the new regulations came out in 2021 August, things have eased out, but we can see that the changes that have taken place have greatly assisted the drone operations in the green zone, that is, away from the airports. The complication arises when we have the operations closer to the airports, where we have manned aircraft, and that is where we have the intensity of operations which needs to be discussed and implemented properly and safely. The idea of a safe operation is all the more important to ensure that the operations of the drones are also taking place comfortably and the aspirations of the drone industry is kept up. Basically, the requirements for the drones are the various stakeholders, the manufacturers, the equipment providers, the UTM service providers, the drone operators, the pilots, the regulators, the safety agencies. All of them are playing their own role in ensuring a safe operation, and each have their own designated responsibilities. So our interest here is to see to it that the operations are safely conducted, the drone industry grows, and the maximum benefit is given to the public. So I would like to share this stage with the other stakeholders, and maybe we can sum up with each concern. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mr. Chairperson, for setting the context. Very good morning to all our panelists and all the esteemed audience. I welcome you to today's discussion on airspace management for complex drone operations. So far in this event, we have had discussions around various application of drones in the space of agriculture sector, medical, healthcare sector, uh, how drones can transform the India's infrastructure sector as well. And there were discussions around some of the measures to enhance drone production, the certification of drones. Now we are hoping, from this particular session, we are hoping to build upon the same and discuss a very important element of drone operations, which is airspace management. And with this brief context, I would like to kick off the discussion for today. I'll share the format that we are going to follow. So I'll request all of the panelists to take about 2 to 3 minutes to share their views on this topic, possibly to introduce themselves as well. And after that, we'll get into interactive sessions wherein we'll pose specific questions to all the panelists. And post that, I'll request our chairperson to conclude this panel discussion. Starting with Professor Satya, over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Good morning to all of you. I'm here to actually talk about a combination of both drones and urban aerial mobility. That is actually the interest that I pursue. At the E-Plane company that I have co-founded, we have been making the smaller drones as well as trying to make air taxis. So the real point that we have to look at is how do we define these air corridors. I think the drone corridors are reasonably getting evolved very well. And we have the general aviation corridor. And in between, we need to also have the UAM corridor, the urban aerial mobility corridor. And while there, I think the world over, they are changing over from UAM to AAM, which is not exactly urban. It can be simply advanced aerial mobility. Advanced for lack of a better word. We're looking at these electric VTOLs that are short haul, fully electric operations. Could actually be allowed for even rooftop landings if they are compact enough. And that is one of those things that we are trying to pursue. How is it possible for us to actually take off and land vertically in congested spaces and go short distances? And the charging infrastructure that is required for not only these eVTOLs, but also for the drones. So if you're actually having payload carrying drones that are part of a network, one of the issues is air traffic management, but something that impinges on the air traffic management is the distribution of charging centers, because you will have flights that are exclusively going to the nearest charging points for getting charged for these drones. Of course, many of these smaller drones, you could actually do battery swapping, but that will still happen at particular places where the batteries swapped are getting charged, so the drones will have to get there. The last part I wanted to point out is how do we actually deal with autonomous drones, because we are essentially supposed to do what's called as RPAS, remotely piloted aircraft systems, but fundamentally they will be autonomous with a human override option. But question is, many times problems happen actually when the human override is not effectively implemented, which essentially means that we are allowing for autonomous operations to be the default in practice. So these are the issues that we would like to actually discuss. I'm just opening up a bunch of different issues here from my perspective. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Professor Satya. Over to you, Wing Commander B.S. Singh Deoji.
Good morning. I represent Rotary Wing Society of India. This is a society formed by mainly retired helicopter professionals. We try to help the industry. And we have been observing the growth of drones with a lot of concern. And many of our operators, helicopter operators, have also become drone operators. So I think it's very timely that this discussion is taking place about air traffic management. We share the skies. That is, the helicopter pilot, they share the skies with many other aircraft, especially when we fly low level and away from controlled airspace. Then we have the problem of sharing the skies also with birds. And there are lots of bird strike accidents that happen. helicopters are tested to take on a strike by a bird of 1.8 kilos, but certainly not tested to withstand a strike with a drone. So there is something of concern here. And then we also have problems of coming into land, and you suddenly have new power lines that have come up, new structures that have come up. There have been accidents, again accidents with VIPs on board, because power lines are not marked generally on the maps. So there are areas of operation where helicopters, despite having all the facilities, avionics on board, we just have to bank on eyeball Mark 1. So under such conditions, when we will be flying around in areas which is drone territory, there's always a possibility of a conflict in traffic. Helicopters by rule, they fly not below 500 feet, going from place A to place B. And as we know, drones are going to operate up to 400 feet. So one concern is this 100-foot gap. Is it adequate? Now helicopters fly on a pressure altimeter. They update the local pressure by getting the information from the nearest airport, what we call the QNH. So you have a true altitude above the mean sea level. And then you also, some helicopters do have radio altimeters, so they can fly accurately 500 feet above the ground. And then we fly over terrain where the ground is undulating, so you have to go up and down. Now whether the drones too will have the advantage of updating their barometric altimeter with the QNH or not, we don't know yet. And whether they maintain a true altitude above the surface, or is it a digital map above which they are maintaining. We need to look into all this. And not only during cruise, when the helicopter goes into land somewhere, there may be an urgent requirement. There's an emergency, somebody who has to be picked up to be taken to a hospital, or there is a natural disaster, or an accident somewhere, or a fire somewhere. Helicopters are called upon to go there at very short notice. So in that case, how do we make sure that there is no conflict of traffic with the drones?
Sure, sir. Sir, thank you so much for providing wonderful insights on the concerns of sharing the space between drones and helicopters. Moving on, I'll request Yashodhan to provide us opening remarks.
Hello everyone, I'm the founder of Navifly. We provide traffic management. We are the only indigenous UTM service provider in this country. We at Navifly want, and for this discussion, to conclude the coherence and build a rapport with the Indian Airports Authority, with the DGCA, with the Digital Sky team, to understand the vision, to contribute equally to that vision and build a clarity for the long term of how the helicopters, the manned aircrafts, the drones are all going to work together, take off and land without any conflicts and any, everything happening smoothly. That is the goal of this discussion. The drone industry is moving rapidly. There are diverse drones, from Nagendra's nano small micro drones to Professor Satya's passenger aerial vehicles. So I hope to work with all of them. Thank you.
Thanks, Yashodhan. Over to you, Mr. Ajit Mate.
Thanks, Sanuj. Good morning, everybody, and thank you, Drone Federation of India, for inviting me to be a part of the panel. Also, thanks to Smith Shah and his team for making this visual behind. That's a very good visual to explain to you what exactly is meant by complex drone operations. Starting from your left towards your right, the level of complexity in the drones drawn on this picture is continuously increasing. The medical drones or the military drones that are being used away from populated areas, maybe in border areas, maybe in rural or remote areas, are not constituting complex drone operations. The drones which are operating as agricultural drones, again, are not under the heading of complex drone operations. It is only when we come to built up city areas, where we'll have drones in different use cases flying in possibly built-up areas, overhead populations that the drones become extremely complex. If you have a look at international studies in this particular field, whether studies which are being done by NASA and Federal Aviation Authority in US, or by ESA in Europe, or in Australia and New Zealand, you will realize that there are grades of complexity being accepted by the world. So suppose there is a drone taxi service starting in a city, and they start with 50 drones. It is still not very complex. Suppose there are multiple drone taxis, each one of them flying 50 drones. It becomes a little more complex. Suppose now last mile delivery drones or food delivery apps start using drones. It becomes a higher level of complexity. What we are essentially talking about is high density, high complexity operations, overhead populations. And that is what requires a lot of due diligence to be conducted by all stakeholders sitting together. We understand that the current, my experience of working with Airport Authority for the CNS ATM roadmap has given me a vision of an understanding of the air traffic management system over the last couple of years. I'm very thankful for the opportunity to Vasu sir. Because of that understanding, we realized that this was a gap where we need to all work together. We need to sit and get the stakeholders together and discuss what kind of operations, what kind of use cases do we foresee, and how are we going to address this. Now, there are multiple levels in this. There will be first level is understanding that the same technology which is being used for current ATM and ASM are very minimally usable for UAS traffic management. That means technology required for UAS traffic management is completely different. Then we need to understand what is our market capability in getting communication, navigation systems, surveillance systems for drones in built-up areas, and possibly UTM systems. Like we have Yashodhan here, who's from a UTM company. So he will be able to vouch for the increasing level of complexity. As the number of drones using the same airspace increases, the technology has to match up to ensure that these operations are still safe in future. And the regulations have to match up. We have had a very good beginning with the UTM policy and the policy framework which was just covered by Mr. Khataukar from Airport Authority. That's a very good beginning. But that is not all. When we start increasing the level of complexity, we will, I'm sure, have to come up with supporting cars in the near future to enable safe operations by different varieties of different use cases of drones in urban areas. And like Professor Chakravarti mentioned, urban air mobility is the final step in the level of complex drone operations in India. It is time that we start meeting together. It is time that all stakeholders start asking the correct questions. Because unless we ask the correct questions, we will not strive to get the answers and build a system which is capable of safely operating not only all the different types of drones together, but also near future, integrating safely with the existing air traffic management system. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Ajit. Over to you, Mr. Nagendra.
Good morning, all. First of all, please pardon with my sore throat, and thanks for the opportunity, DFI. I'm Nagendran Kandaswamy, founder and CEO of Throttle Aerospace System. We are one of the leading drone manufacturers in India. And before I get into the subject, I would like to set up a preamble here. What I'm going to talk, keeping in my mind is, when I talk about complex environment, I'll not talk about dozens of flights per day. I'll talk about at least 1 million of flights per day. That's something I want to do preamble here. When we wanted to do a 1 million of flight, what I foresee is it's going to be 4 challenges in a very broad area. One is going to be a technological challenges. I'll come back more on that. And there will be some regulatory challenges and security and societal challenges. And last will be the environmental as well as in terms of the terrain challenges. This is something that in a high level I would like to set up the context now. We'll talk about this more and more.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nagendran. Thank you all the panelists for sharing their views. So panelists expressed their views about some of the infrastructure requirements. They also discussed about concerns with operating the airspace and sharing it with drones and other manned aircraft. Yashodhan specifically talked about the vision for a digital sky, and then we discussed the complexities of airspace management and how current ATC system cannot be used for US traffic management. So one simple question over here. When we are talking about all of these challenges, one thing I think the audience would definitely like to understand is that what are those 4 or 5 key capabilities which are expected from a good airspace management system? Professor Satya, if you would like to take that question.
Yes, I think all speakers have now recognized that we need to look at this fairly comprehensively. My expectation is that we need to have this digital sky platform to be very, very effective, and specifically from the point of view of making sure that we are not having a breach in the altitudes, because if you have a 400 feet altitude limit for the drones, let's say the small to medium drones. So the way I look at the zones, right, the green zones, yellow zones, and red zones, is it's actually 3-dimensional. As far as drones is concerned, anything more than 400 feet is actually yellow zone, which essentially means that you need to have permissions to fly above 400 feet, right? So we need to be able to monitor this. I think the tracking system is going to be very effective, particularly from the altitude breach point of view, because anything more than that is actually going to infringe on current general aviation and the future urban aerial mobility platforms. So this is the first thing that I would like to say. The digital sky platform should be able to monitor breach of altitudes beyond 400 feet. That is the first thing. The second thing that we will have to actually look at is on the urban aerial mobility side, we probably will have to slightly enlarge zones which are actually considered to be yellow, or rather take what I said back, restrict where the yellow zones and maybe make it more red. Like for example, around airports, we may have to actually go around the landing corridors that current airports have, so that we will have to have a larger red zone around them, because the altitudes at which these are flying is more when compared to the drones do, right? So it's a 3-dimensional space in which if you have a landing corridor and you have an urban aerial mobility corridor that is at a higher altitude, you need to have a larger red zone around the airport when compared to the current red zone levels. So as you increase the altitudes of operation, you need to do a little bit of more rezoning of these corridors. That's the next thing that I would like to suggest. The third thing is we need to have a seamless, so one thing about the UAMs and so on is, the good thing is actually we expect to actually have ADS-B on their platforms when compared to the drones, right? So it should be possible for us to actually track these much more effectively when compared to the drones, and therefore that should be integrated in the air traffic management for the urban aerial mobility. Last point I would like to point out is, as we get into urban aerial mobility, we have to have a layered approach about this. I think initially we will probably be looking at typical helicopter-like operations as far as air traffic is concerned. File a flight plan with the ATC, get a flight path authorization, commit the flight, and then file a report. So whatever we do for helicopters is something that we can actually adopt for urban aerial mobility, when the number of flights across a city could be about 10 to 20. And that's actually very good, because every aircraft can actually do a particular flight in about 10 minutes. So they will do about, let's say you had 20 aircraft in a city, it can do about 1,000 flights a day, not a problem, right? So you will actually have a fairly effective service going with just 20 aircraft that can be managed with the current capacity, is my opinion. But panelists and others could actually correct me if I'm wrong. But going forward, we will definitely need an automated ATC for urban aerial mobility as well, right? But we don't need to actually stop for that to launch a service, is the point I'm trying to say.
Sure, sir. Thank you, Professor Satya. We'll definitely discuss this last point in much more detail, because that's which is going to define the future of aviation. And rightly said, conformance monitoring, tracking are some of the important aspects of airspace management. But since we understand the challenges, I would like to ask my colleague Yashodhan, what is that one thing which is preventing us from achieving this particular thing? When we are already aware about the challenges, when we are aware about the requirements, what is that one thing which is preventing us to achieve that?
Okay. What the one thing which a UTM SP needs is a common information service provider, right? A layer above us which governs all the UTM SPs and governs how they perform, how they operate, and certifies them, right? And we really want the digital sky to be that CISP along with Airports Authority of India, so that they can performance track each one of our UTMSPs. They can tell us what are the further requirements, give us a roadmap of how we need to operate together and exclusively, and certify us for us to provide services. Today, when I see BVLOS trials on ground, a person has to call up the ATC every 5 minutes, disturbing them and telling them, look, we need to fly in the next 5 minutes, please give us an approval. That entire process can already be done in our UTM. You can submit plans in advance, and the ATCs or the authorities can view it, and they can approve or reject based on their preferences. But there's still that gap, and this is the gap which we would like to quickly fill, because right now there are only a few drones in the sky, but when there are thousands of drones, it's going to be another issue for everyone to be compliant to a UTMSP and use the services.
Right. So, yes, you raised about the UTM framework policy and the digital sky. Continuing on the same, Mr. Ajit, do you have any views on the UTM policy framework released by Ministry of Civil Aviation last year? And any other elements on the way forward that you expect from the government on the same?
Yes, certainly, Sanuj. I think a very important point that Mr. Harshad mentioned earlier is that the UTM policy framework is a live and dynamic document. That means it is a document that needs to be grown by all of us together. And as the technologies come in, as more types of operations, use cases emerge, as more users emerge, we have to be in continuous dialogue with all the stakeholders in order to upgrade the policy in a manner that it supports everybody's operations safely and also integrates safely with the ATM environment.
This is an open question to all the panelists. I think we are running behind the time. We do not want to be behind other countries when we know that we already have a good platform to take up on this space. So what could be that one way through which we can immediately expedite the development of the framework, or we can develop certain standards and regulations which can withstand the regulations being provided by other regulators like FAA and EASA?
May I?
Yeah, please.
Basically, the requirement is that the drones which are flying should be able to cater to the stringent standards. So now that we are looking at manufacturing drones in India, we'll have to ensure that the quality of the drones that we are manufacturing pass the stringent tests, the requirements of the standards. One, that will enable our operations to be conducted safely, and the regulator would be able to take a stand, yes, that this is dependable. That's the main crux of the issue. Second, one is the ability of the drones and the parts. Second is the operations. You have stringent standards, but if it is not followed by the operator or by the pilot, knowing fully well that there is a red signal and I break it, that is going to be an issue. Because we need a system where the equipment is good, we need a system where the operators follow the rules. Then maybe we can look at processes, simplifications, and then take it to the regulator to take it forward. As you know that the ICAO has not come out with regulations per se as far as the drone operations are concerned, because it is at a nascent stage. Different countries are looking at different possibilities. They do their own testing. It's possible that we can lead, India as a nation can lead and give a direction to ICAO to make certain standards for which we need to show them the path, we need to do the tests, prove it to be successful, and stick to the standards which are required. I think that is very, very important. And as the others have pointed out, operations of drones in the green area outside the main cities has been simplified, and they no longer need a clearance either from the Air Force or from the Airports Authority of India or anybody for that matter. It can be operated without any concern. The concern is when they come into the yellow area, which is above 400 feet all over the country and closer to the airports. And as of now, the red areas, which is very close to the airports, and certain areas as defined as strictly required for security purposes, then you need special clearances. Other than that, the operations have been simplified. But when the operations are taking place in yellow or red zone, we'll have to look at possibilities of giving certain corridors even in the yellow or red zones, which are keeping the operations away from the manned aircraft. Unfortunately, I'm not talking about the helicopters because helicopters operate at low level, and that's going to be an issue whether they operate in the green or yellow or red areas. So we need to have some system where helicopters are also able to operate and the drones are also able to operate. So as far as Airports Authority of India is concerned, we are willing to go forward, look at possibilities of creating corridors very close to the airports as well, test it, and then take it forward for ease of operations. Thanks.
Right. I think it's a valid point. I'll just come to Professor Satya. So I think it's a valid point because when we look at the commercial viability of drone operations and also when we look from the perspectives of various e-commerce players and all, it becomes important to have operations close to the airports. That's when they can have a seamless flow of cargo and passenger at a later stage. So yeah, Mr. Satya, you would like to add to this?
Yeah, I had 3 quick points to make. One of them is a very general point. The other ones are a little bit more specific. In fact, the third one is actually a question that I have to ask to the panelists and the audience. The first general point is something that I would like to echo what Chairman Mr. Vasudevan was making about how it's important for India to lead this when compared to any other thing that we have done. Without, I think there will be a broad consensus in my saying that so far we have actually always been trying to follow what other people are doing, right? So any time you have a question, you always ask the question, what is FAA doing about this, right? So and then we see can adopt that. But I think we have come to a point where, particularly on the drone side of things, with the liberalization of what's going on, it's time for us to actually take the lead. And that's one of the, I mean, not to say that we have to actually not shut our eyes to what other people are doing. We have to definitely learn from others. But this first of all, the mentality has to be that we need to lead this. That is something that I would like to emphasize as much as possible, because the market that we have is actually so huge. We just can't, push the responsibility to somebody else. We have to actually take the responsibility. This is the first point. The second point that I want to point out is that there are now ways by which you can have multiple different cameras that are positioned in critical areas like airports and other critical places, which can monitor drones with a lot of deep learning capability. So there are these images that can be obtained where they can be trained to identify drones and track them, right, a lot better than what it used to be before. So, and there are people who are developing these kinds of algorithms and so on. So it's important, I think, for airports and other critical locations to install these kinds of drone tracking visual systems, right? That is, I think I've not really seen much talked about that. So I think that's important as a second thing. Right. The third question, the third point I have is actually a question on what is the level of trackers for drones? Because I think that's a huge headache that's been up against, that we have been up against, right? So I think if there is any clarity on the development of trackers that are lightweight for drones, that will actually solve a huge amount of problem And then the question is like, how do you actually handle the data of all the tracking that happens, right? So, but that's a big data problem to solve. But first of all, we need to get the data, right? When it comes to things like UAMs and other things, ADSBs will be there. But I think for drones, we have the tracking mechanism. I am actually unclear about. That's what I wanted to point out.
Sanju, I would like to answer. So I think this is something very similar, which is alarming in our head also. The data is something very important. The data management also very important. We have carried out some BVLOS experiment quite some time back. We flew our aircraft more than 140 hours day and night. Some of the important thing what we found is the data is essentially, if you see the current telecom infrastructure, it's all basically ground-based user focus, which has to be somewhat leveraged to the air-based user focus. That's something very important, first of all, to get the connectivity. The moment you get the connectivity, the data size is going to be huge in the size. You need to come out with a certain level of new IT technologies where the data sizes has to be reduced to reduce your latencies. The more the latencies is the more dangerous for the prediction and deconfiguration. So what you need to do is you need to come out with something, a very, very low level programming language where your data can, you can take a less bandwidth and you move forward. And also, I would like to echo the last conversation, last panel discussion also. The healthcare which is happening on remote villages, but if you wanted to take some commercial viability, commercial advantages, it has to happen on the urban environment rather than the rural environment. Keeping that, I think I really appreciate the Airport Authority Chairman's vision that he would like to allow us to do some amount of POCs or experiment in the red zone, as well as also we can look at it, we can fairly, instead of working on a tier 1 city, we can think of tier 2 cities where we can try to set up some complex environment and fly as much as we can do. It's not just 1 or 2 flights, we can try to fly as much as flight we can do and try to gather all the data and funnel back all the lessons that we learn, and probably that will help us to keep our R&D strengths required to face the challenges.
Sure. Yeah, just one last thing. I think Mr. Dio would also like to contribute to this. So in the interest of time, sir, I'll request you to keep it short. Yeah, please.
Okay. I just have 2 suggestions regarding deconflicting air traffic at lower altitudes. One is Ministry of Civil Aviation is developing a portal called HeliDisha. So every helicopter, when he files a flight plan in HeliDisha, the people concerned get notified, like the district authorities, police and things like that. So if digital sky can also be linked to HeliDisha, then all drone operators will come to know if any helicopter is about to land in that area where they are operating, number 1. Number 2, we must look at the possibility of installing ADSB in all drones and all helicopters, so that each will come to know about location of others. Thank you.
Just one point. There are some issues in proliferation of ADSB. The ADSB clutters the radar screen. So if we have too many of the ADSB clutter on the ATC radar, the system goes for a spin and the controller would not be able to perform the duties, especially when it is close to an airport. So we need to look at alternate ways of identification and tracking, which is already being discussed. And I feel that we need the industry, the regulator, and the security agencies to come together, discuss, and then go ahead. I think that would be a better bet. Thank you.
Sure, thank you. As we are towards the end of the discussion, I'll request each panelist to provide the parting thoughts and maybe a few cents for us to take forward this discussion. Professor Satya, over to you.
Yeah, I think one important thing that I would like to recommend is either just this panel or maybe a few other people, is it possible to actually have a air traffic management working group at the national level, right? So, and DFI can probably take that lead and then form a working group that involves all the stakeholders, because this is going to be an emerging topic for the next few years. So we need to have a working group which meets periodically, discusses things, have a WhatsApp group, early morning chats, whatever it is, right? So I think that there must be something that is aggressively done on this. That's one thing that I want to say. The second thing, I think, just to respond to the ADSB clutter that Chairman was talking about, I think the UTM policy is actually looking for more distributed way of air traffic management. So over time, I think we would probably want to actually have distributed ATCs also, so that you actually have multiple radar screens that are not really cluttering. So there must be a way by which we have this kind of a network of ATCs rather than just one single ATC even per city or per airport. It should not be airport centric is the point I'm trying to say.
Okay. Request Mr. Dio to provide his last inputs.
Okay, so I think a very good suggestion given that we should set up a working group and try out a real life scenario and see how we can deconflict air traffic. At the ADSP thing, if it's not going to work out, we have to find a way. So best way is to, I think, test it out under a working group.
Sure. Yashodhan, would you like to add something? Any parting thoughts or any food for thought for us? Yeah.
I'd like for the UTM policy to be followed through with the UTM trials to initiate soon so that UTMs can be certified. They were supposed to start, within a few months now.
Right. Mr. Ajit?
Yes, I'll echo what Professor Satya said, that we need to have a working group where all stakeholders sit together. Important things that this working group needs to focus on is standardization of equipment, because what we have seen is even in the current CNS ATM environment, the ATM automation systems of neighboring FIRs are unable to talk to each other because they were made by different vendors and they are of different vintage. So it's a problem which we are facing in the air traffic management side. We don't want to fall into the same trap on the UTM side. So we need to work together on this, and only a group sitting together and defining the standards, possibly to match up to global standards, so that even outsiders can come and fly their drones in our places and our drones can go and fly outside. Yeah. That is very important.
Yeah. I think this is a common point, I think, where we are getting a coherence from all the panelists. Any additional point from you, Mr. Nagendran?
See, my thought also, like other panelists, what I also would like to add here is, instead of just creating a working group, only working on the policies and direction, we need to roll up our sleeves, we need to go and do some experiments in the collaborative approach. As Mr. Ajit was talking about that, we have to come out with a seamless integration between multiple UTM, multiple drones, multiple systems, multiple ASTM data. So if you do this in a very collaborative and very seamless approach, I think this will give a more lesson. I hope that will help us to solve all the challenges which we foresee in future.
Sure. Thank you so much. Thank you all the panelists for your insightful inputs. I think we have definitely learned about some of the challenges which are involved in the airspace management. At the same time, the kind of expectations we have from the government bodies, and possibly few things that we can take up as a way forward. Now I'll request our chairperson, Mr. Vasudevan, to provide his concluding remarks.
Thanks to all the panelists for your remarks. And I also second the opinion of having a working group consisting of all the stakeholders, especially the regulators, the manufacturers, the security agencies, the air traffic control units, to take it forward along with DFI with valuable inputs so that we could take the country forward and ensure that the drone industry reaches the height that it needs to. Thank you.
Thank you all.
बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद हमारे सभी गेस्ट स्पीकर्स, द डिग्निटरीज ऑन द डेस्क. मैं निवेदन करना चाहूँगी जो हमारे मॉडरेटर हैं श्री सनुज मित्तल आपसे कि कृपया हमारे सभी गेस्ट्स को एक मेमेंटो प्रदान करें अपनी तरफ से. आदर और सम्मान के साथ आज के इस कार्यक्रम की, इस ड्रोन महोत्सव की सुखद यादें हमारे मेहमानों के हृदय में बस जाएं. As a token of our immense respect and to honor our esteemed guests, we want to present them mementos. ड्रोन से अच्छा इस कार्यक्रम का स्मृति चिन्ह और क्या हो सकता था. आप सभी के घर का कोना या दीवार जहाँ भी चाहें ये सजी रहे ड्रोन से, यही शुभकामनाएं हैं, मंगल कामनाएं हैं. और हमारा ये जो देश है 2030 तक ड्रोन ग्लोबल ड्रोन हब बनने की दिशा में आगे बढ़ रहा है, मार्च कर रहा है, प्रयाण कर रहा है, वो सफल रहे. और अब आपको ही सनुज मित्तल जी इस महोत्सव की तरफ से एक सुखद याद ड्रोन के रूप में.